Hi everybody, this is Mark and welcome back to Beyond Profit, a global perspective. If globalization makes the world richer, why do so many workers feel worse off? Globalization makes things cheaper, but someone, somewhere is paying the price, and it's usually the workers. The question is, why? In the last video, we looked at the pros and cons of globalization. Today, we're going deeper to see why labor takes the hit. Are you ready? Let's do it. Thanks for watching the video. If you like it, please hit like, subscribe, that way more people see it. And please share your thoughts in the comments below. Do workers benefit or not from globalization? I'd like to hear your take. So there's many problems with globalization. Some of the biggest of them have to do with labor, right? We talked about sweatshops, we talked about Americans losing jobs, the hatred that sometimes happens when people try to find jobs among people who are not receptive to that. So I want to talk about that a little bit more systematically, right? Why does that happen? Why is labor such a big deal? My first answer to that question is that workers become devalued and interchangeable like commodities. Let's go back to supply and demand for a second. You remember we started talking about supply and demand when it came to products, right? The more products there are in the market, the more the value goes down. The fewer products there are, the more the value goes up. And then I really messed with your brain and I pulled out $1 and said, hey, that's true with currency too. Like with a whole lot of currency, the value goes down. And with not very much currency, the value goes up. I'm here to tell you the same is true with labor, with people. The more people there are who do a certain thing, the more their value goes down, and the fewer people, their value goes up. What happens when you have too many lawyers in an economy? Too many silly lawsuits, right? Are you injured? Would you like to be injured?
Would you like to be injured?
It's jungle law! That's what happens when you get too many lawyers in the economy, but they have the flexibility to go off and do some jungle law stuff or whatever, They can adapt because they're more highly educated. And that education is something that makes less of them. One of the reasons you guys are here today in this classroom, it's not just because you're super excited about international relations, which I'm so happy you're here. That's so awesome. Thank you so much for coming to my class. It's because you want to make more money than the average Joe by the time you're done with this 4 years. And statistically speaking, you will. Undeniably, the difference between somebody that's got a high school education and college education, it's not even close. The idiots out there that are saying college is not worth your money, even with all those loans and stuff like that, have not done the math and don't understand the statistics. You get a master's degree, it bumps you up even higher than that. Even those people who you make fun of, you say, well, you got a degree in philosophy or whatever, those people are probably going to end up with a job at an agency someplace, making a whole lot of money than somebody that didn't graduate from high school, without a doubt. That's why you're in an MBA program, is so that there will be less of you. There's not as many MBA people, which cause the value of your salaries potentially to go up.
In theory.
Right? In theory, yeah. That also depends on your industry, of course. Like, think about this, who makes more, a general practitioner or a surgeon? The surgeon, right? Because they can do something that not very many other people can do. The same thing is true when you start talking about auto workers. The more auto workers there are, the more the value of their wages would go down, and the fewer, the more they go up. So I'm going to show you this picture and kind of tell you a little story of how that works, or at least worked historically, right? This is a product life cycle curve, and I'm using it mostly to illustrate its effect on labor. So let's just pretend we're talking about the auto industry, which really originated in the late 19th century. That's when cars were first invented. And when cars were first invented, how did that work? They probably didn't have factories, right? I mean, if I was somebody and I wanted a car, how would I go buy a car? There was a point where everybody who wanted a car was probably going to somebody who was doing it kind of on a one-off sort of thing. It was usually somebody who was like, he knew how to make a car, and he could make more cars, and very few people could do it. right? And then if I had to get it repaired, who do I take it to? Probably the same dude that made it, right? So you think cars are expensive at this point? Yeah, that happens with most industries, most technologies on the front end. They tend to be very, very expensive on the front end because only so many people know how to do it, only so many people know how to fix it. Yeah. And on the front end of any kind of development, that means the labor costs are going to be very, very high, right? Then you go through a period of growth. The industry grows, you get the Henry Fords of the world coming into it, and now we're going to try to automate aspects of this industry, right? We introduce interchangeable parts. We have an assembly line, right? We change from a situation where it's just one person or very few people who know how to do something to a point where you don't need experts, or at least not as many of them anymore, right? You can get a whole bunch of people and pay them not very much to do just one step in a line. I don't have to pay somebody to learn how to build a car if I can just teach them how to do a spot weld, right? To put a tire on a car over and over again on an assembly line, right? What happens to the value of those workers? They go down. And the reason why they go down is because lots of people can just put tires on cars. Lots of people can spot weld a car. Lots of people can assemble things, right? You don't need that level of expertise to make that happen, which means as the industry is growing and maturing, labor rates are tending to go down. Or at least there's pressure for labor rates to go down. By the time we get to an auto industry approaching growth and maturity, then wages should be going down. And this would have been in the 1920s, 1930s as it was growing. This was leading edge technology which put the United States on the dominant industrial path in the 20th century, sort of like basically dominate the global economy. So is that what happened? Did labor rates go down as the industry grew? It's kind of a mixed bag. They started off growing at this growth stage. When Henry Ford first gathered people around and there was a huge demand for Model Ts and there were lots of people working there, it actually essentially created a middle class where you had people where people wanted so much in terms of car, they wanted so many cars and there was lots of money available, and so he was paying people quite a lot compared to the national average. What started happening though is as more people started entering the market and there was more competition between companies, then there was also competition for wages, and as it became more automated, there were more and more people who could work for less. There was more people than jobs. It became a race to the bottom to see who could pay people the least. And then you started, then these heads of industry started treating their workers really, really badly and would kick them out on the streets and just, fire them for no good reason and then just hire somebody else to sort of take their place. So they were literally interchangeable, just like the interchangeable parts on an automobile. What changes? What'd you say?
Collective bargaining. Unions.
Unions. Oh man, that's the thing that screws things up for business. It's like if I could only make wages a lot cheaper than cheese, but no, they got organized, man. And for a while, the government didn't do anything about it, right? So the unions got together and said, look, we're going to refuse to work, or we're going to, you need to meet our demands or else we're not going to go there. And most of the industry basically said, all right, well, you guys are fired and we're just going to bring somebody else in here because labor rights weren't protected. Eventually, the government did decide that they were worth protecting, but that was only after there was actually a bloody conflict. Like, there were workers that were protesting the street. Henry Ford sent in like a private security group to go and shoot at protesters. And then it took a little bit before the government jumps in and says, all right, well, we're going to allow unionization activities to happen. And it's only that then which causes wages to start rising to the point where they're getting a decent percentage of what the overall business is making. When I'm talking about workers being interchangeable, this is what I mean. This is a quote from Karl Marx, written in 1844. A lot of times you say the word Karl Marx and people are like, ooh, communist, ooh, subversive, scary. But I don't want you to be scared. I want you to listen to this quote and see if this makes sense to you. The worker becomes all the poorer the more wealth he produces, the more his production increases in power and range. The worker becomes an even cheaper commodity, the more commodities he creates. With the increasing value of the world of things, proceeds in direct proportion to the devaluation of the world of men. Labor produces not only commodities, it produces itself and the worker as a commodity. and does so in the proportion in which it produces commodities generally. Okay? Those are fancy words, but it basically is just saying what I was talking about, is that people are commodities in the capitalist system, right? If there's a few of us that are specialized in knowledge, we get to make more money, but the more stuff we make and the more interchangeable we become, the more our value goes down. You are a commodity based on how many versions of you there are out in that workplace. You're a number. All right, so let's talk about Walmart. This is going to be my Walmart case study. So just like Mr. Cox, I'm going to talk about how awesome Walmart is. No, I'm not. You're going to get the other side of the story.
I love it.
Okay.
He does love some Walmart.
So he does love himself some Walmart. We've had some long conversations about this. So Walmart has a domestic and an international strategy as far as how to deal with labor. And so if you look at its domestic strategy, one approach is to drive local competition out through low-cost strategies based on international economies of scale. That is to say, they're huge. They've got factories all over the world. Because of globalization, they get the cheap stuff, right? That's why we shop at Walmart, is if we're not super well off and we're not too concerned about the quality, we can afford stuff. And that's a great benefit. But what that also means is that they have been able to put a lot of other businesses out of business over the years. It was a deliberate strategy for a long, long time to put a Walmart like on the edge of a small town and basically undercut everybody so that all of the small businesses on Main Street would go out of business. Then everybody would buy from them. And where would the people who work that just went out of business?
Walmart.
They go over to Walmart if there were enough jobs. They might leave town if they had enough money to leave town. If you were a pharmacist, you were probably making more money on the Main Street, but now you can start working over at Walmart instead.
And once you eliminate your competition, you can raise your prices and they don't have any choice.
When you eliminate your competition, you raise your prices again. Yes, absolutely. And that's happened throughout the United States as part of its strategy. So another thing, to deliberately prevent the formation of unions. Right? We talked about how advantageous it is to not have unions, right? That unions will raise the cost of your labor. And if you know anything about line items on a budget and a business plan, labor is usually like, if not the most, one of the most expensive things you can have. And if your business model, like Walmart's is to try to sell your stuff as cheap as you possibly can, then that means you need to squeeze as many parts of that budget as you possibly can. And that means labor. So one of the things that I'm going to try to do if I'm Walmart is try to prevent unions from forming. And so they have a rapid response They have a rapid response force coming out of Bentonville, Arkansas, where if there's even an inkling of workers trying to get organized, they'll fly in the lawyers and just try to stamp that out as fast as they can. They have anti-union propaganda and videos, part of their training process that you have to go through. And they have successfully prevented the unionization of workers across the United States. Now, there was one time in Canada where it looked like there was a union that was going to start up, and Walmart actually decided just to shut down the whole store before it even started and move it someplace else. There are other places in the world where people have successfully unionized in Walmart stores, but it's because it had been a requirement of the government. Like Walmart was at one time in China. It was in one time in Germany. But neither one of those situations worked out, in part because of the high cost of labor. The third thing is to try to drive down the cost of labor. If I want to maintain this viable business model, then one of the things I'm going to do to drive down the cost of labor is try to take advantage of the interchangeable aspect of labor, right? So think about this. The Main Street's been shut down. I'm Walmart, I can sell whatever it is that normally was sold down at Main Street or whatever. The people that I usually need to run my business are people who are like working back in the warehouse, people who are stocking shelves, people who are working as cashiers, and maybe a few managers, right? I mean, I'll probably fill in some blanks, but that's most of what you've got. Now you've got a good lot of the town that may be out of work, so you've got more workers than you actually have positions. So that means that your job application stack is going to be pretty thick. Do you need loads of training in order to be a worker at Walmart? No. So as a result, you don't have to charge a whole lot. And another thing that's kind of cool, if you're Walmart and you're operating under this model, is you can have people not work full time, right? So you can cap their hours somewhere under 40 hours a week, so that you're 32 hours a week.
Magic number.
So you can cap it at 32 hours a week, which means that you don't have to offer benefits to any workers that work more than 32 hours. And where are they going to get their health insurance?
Not their problem.
Oh, it isn't their problem. Whose problem is it? Who supplies the health insurance that Walmart won't provide because they won't give them 40-hour weeks? The government. And who pays for that?
People.
Taxpayers. Okay, so you guys are subsidizing Walmart workers because Walmart won't give them benefits. There actually have been a lot of lawsuits lodged against Walmart for some of these labor practices. One of the cases, in fact I think more than one of the cases actually, involved a manager trying to get somebody to work more than the required number of hours, but to do it off the clock. So the idea is that you come to the end of a shift and you turn to this person who's stocking shelves and you roll up this product and you say, hey, can you stock the rest of the stuff on the shelf? And the person's like, well, I've already done my 32 hours for the week, so I need to clock out. I'm not going to be able to do all of this. The next week, this person finds out that they have fewer hours. They haven't been fired, right? They have fewer hours than they did the previous week. Now, if you're a person who is working at Walmart, chances are you're not making a load of money, and you're having a hard time, you're desperate for that job, so you got to keep that job. So you read between the lines, and when the guy does the same thing at the end of the next 32-hour shift, you're going to clock out and then just finish up afterwards. Which means that if you're being paid minimum wage, you're actually being paid less than minimum wage. Now, I'm picking on Walmart, but it could be loads and loads of businesses because it is difficult to run a business when labor costs are high. There's always a pressure to try to pay people less. And this is just an example of how this particular company has done it in ways that have not been very ethical and its consequences. This has less to do with the individual worker, but it does have repercussions in that direction. We talked before about its low-cost production strategy, outsourcing their production of goods, avoiding regulations, just like what we talked about with some of the downsides of globalization, right? Walmart taking advantage of the fact that we have a largely globalized market. They can buy from whoever they need to, and they can avoid regulations by not making things in the United States. To sum up, workers become devalued and interchangeable like commodities. That's the first problem with the globalization of labor. The second one, I'm not going to tell you what it is yet because I have to tell you a little bit of story but as we get there. So I'm going to start off by returning to the logic of free trade and comparative advantage. That's what drives globalization. Once again, it makes sense for countries to specialize in the production of those goods it produces most efficiently and to buy the goods it produces less efficiently from other countries. This was the math. This is what we learned. I'm not going to go through all of this all over again, but it's here to remind you that when countries are just providing for themselves, they're not nearly as efficient as they are when they're specializing and trading, and the numbers add up and they're real. So, like if Britain specializes in medicine, it's going to be a whole lot more efficient and make more money, and so is France if it focuses on food. All these assumptions found the basis of economic liberalism, capitalism, all the stuff that we love as Americans. This is the model. This is how capitalism works. Specialization of products leads to specialization of labor. Jobs vacate the U.S., leaving some without jobs. These people are hard-pressed to move into comparable jobs. Conversely, globalization increases specialization in the U.S. of high-end jobs. So keep this in mind, right? When we specialize in those things that we're good at, right? Like we talked in the United States already about, like, we showed a map of the United States and what we manufacture or produce the most, the top export from all these different states, right? Those are things that we specialize in, right? But if we start exporting out the things that we don't specialize in anymore, then those jobs are going to go away. The value of those kinds of jobs are going to decline, whereas the things that we do specialize in, it's like there's more opportunities there. So if you're in an economy, especially an information-based economy, maybe a service-oriented economy, right? We don't need as many workers that are just going to do the sort of basic kind of manual labor stuff. We need people who are going to like have the the more highly educated jobs to move into those places, and that's where the more high-paying jobs are.
And then
So the rich and educated people take the leading-edge jobs, and the poor then move into the service industry. But here's the question. So France focuses just on food. What happens to all the food jobs in Britain when France is making all the food? They go away, right. So these people are unemployed now. Right? What happens to medicine jobs, right? So France is focusing on food. Now we got all these pharmaceutical workers. Are you going to expect them to go into agriculture now? This is crazy, right? But that's real. Now, the smart thing to do would be what the EU has done, and that is you have open borders. You allow the labor to go wherever the labor demand is, right? So that means those people in Britain should be going over to France to try to get those jobs. Am I right? In order to make that happen. What's the likelihood that these people are going to want to leave their home? Right. What's the likelihood that they're going to learn a new language? And plus, I mean, whatever wages they had before may not be comparable to the wages they go wherever they go next. Now, talking about Britain and France is one thing, but a more realistic example might be like, hey, I got a factory job in Michigan. Let's say that I'm an auto worker in Flint, Michigan or something, and due to globalization, that auto plant has moved off to Mexico, right? So what happens to this person? Well, first of all, if they lose their wages, it probably means they can't pay their mortgage anymore. And chances are they're not the only person in the community that can't pay their mortgage anymore. So what happens to home values when that happens? They decline, right? So now I not only do I not have a job and a wage, but I can't sell my house now, or I sell it at a loss. So am I going to move? Can I possibly move? I can move to Mexico, go get a job down there. You think that's realistic? You think somebody who's like maybe 5 or 10 years from retirement is going to learn how to speak Spanish and go down to a lower wage job someplace in another country? Don't think so, right? So a lot of these people end up working at Walmart or McDonald's or wherever, right? Because there's no other place for them to go. That's the problem these economic models don't really take very seriously sometimes, is that people aren't all that flexible. And it takes pioneers to like say, hey, I'm going to go try something new and explore and do something different and seek my fortune. There's certain kinds of people that do that. Not everybody's able to do that. If you want to understand why people are upset about globalization, then this is a lot of it, right? If you want to understand why people are voting for Donald Trump, let's be blatant. This is part of it, right? He speaks this language. He's not wrong when he's saying that this is an issue. So I understand why people feel the way they feel and why they vote the way they vote. This is a real critique. This is a real thing. Just like I told you that we are a whole lot richer from globalization, and just like I told you there's lots and lots of benefits, that's all true too. Here's another issue, is that we're thinking about trade, say, between Britain and France in our little example. It's important to remember that trade rarely is a single transaction. It's composed of multiple transactions over time, and the question is what happens to a trade relationship over time. And so the example that I gave you back here, this is like one transaction. What I want to show you is what happens when we do it over and over again. Let's say this is costs over the year due to free trade, and this is what they are able to save over each year, right? So you remember, by specialization, Britain saves $10, France saves $25, right? Or at least that's their cost, right? So over 5 years, it's 50 for Britain and 125 for France. Over 10 years, it's 100 for Britain and 250 for France. 150 and 375 by 15, let's jump to 25, 250 and 525. If this were a line chart, what is happening here? France is losing a lot more money than Britain. You have what we call a rich-poor gap. That is, due to free trade, the richest countries in the world are making out like bandits, and the poorer countries in the world, they're still getting better, right? This is like I said, expenses. They're still improving, they're still making money, but not nearly to the level as those at the top of the globalization food chain. So this is one reason why, again, Donald Trump doesn't know what he's talking about globalization in the United States and international organizations and all this stuff. It's like, we are the richest country in the world, which means this helps us. Like, you get rid of that, and we get poorer as a result. And it's not them screwing us, we're screwing them. That's the real story here. What is the problem with global disparity, right? That is the second problem that we're going to talk about in terms of globalization of labor, is that built into this model is this sense that those who are on top continue to stay on top, and those who are on bottom continue to stay on bottom. Here's the bottom line. Globalization doesn't just move products, it moves power in the labor market, and rarely in favor of laborers. You can see how it can drive wages down and contribute to inequality, but just how much inequality are we talking about? In the next video, we're going to put some real numbers and real stories behind that question, because the scale of global inequality may be a whole lot bigger than you think. I'll see you next time.